Hello and welcome to Nerdarchy for Nerds by Nerds. I'm Nerdicus Dave, and today I'm joined by Justice Arman. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well.
So you currently you're working over at Beetle and Grimm's as a designer and writer, and also you're a freelancer. What is your actual title over there?
It's funny. We had this talk for our business cards, and
Yeah.
Beetle and Grimm's has this focus with goblins. We would call ourselves, the support goblin, for instance. And we were trying to make our business cards, and there was probably this is the most discussion we've ever had as a company over which goblin we're going to be. We got so far from our actual titles at some point where we were talking like Spice Girl goblins, like I'm going to be Posh Goblin. You'll be, I don't know, Spicy Goblin. I can't remember. Spice Goblin, I think, is one of the Spice Girls. I don't remember.
Very sounds very professional.
And Bill, our chief executive goblin, stopped and said, "Should these business cards actually have titles on them so people know what we do?" And we're like, "Yeah, that's probably right." So I am an associate producer goblin and an event coordinator goblin and a writer goblin. So I'm like three goblins.
In a trench coat.
Yes, in a trench coat. Oh, that would actually be a really good business card. Three goblins in a trench coat, and then I
Uh,
could put them underneath. Now I have to go
yeah,
do my
you have the
business
picture
cards
of the
again.
three goblins, and then each job title.
Oh, that's a great idea. I need to ask Chris Daly about that. Maybe he can do some art for my business card.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's funny. Like when I think about like the things we do for work now, and we're having these like in-depth discussions about ogres or goblins, and like that was like a business meeting.
Yeah, I think that's my favorite thing about being in this industry is how whimsical the conversations can get while
Mhm.
also being extremely serious. Like,
Yes.
no, it has to be a frost giant. Think about the age of
Mhm.
everlasting ice. This is consistent with the theme here. I'm all about the frost giant. Then somebody's like getting a steel chair and they're like, it needs to be an ogre.
Yeah.
Uh,
Or the weird intricate details we get into, like what does the ogre courting ritual look like?
right, yeah. Yeah, like 3.5 and what the Draconomicon and
Yeah.
all that stuff. Yeah.
So what edition did you start with?
So I started playing in 3.5, I think back in 2013 was the first time I played, or 2012. There was this guy, Colin, at my college in my dorm. We lived in like the farthest away on campus housing as we could get to school. So it was about a mile off campus, and it was actually a pretty close community with all these college kids. And we were hanging out one day, and he said, "Hey, do you want to come play D&D?" And I'm like, he's like, "Dungeons and Dragons," and I'm like, um, "Is that basement game where you have the piece of paper behind you and you roll all those dice?"
Mhm.
And he's like, "Yeah, pretty much." And I'm like, "You don't know if I'm there yet." And he's
Yeah.
like, "Are you sure you can play anything?" And so I gave out this really wild character concept, and he was like, "Oh yeah, just come over on Sunday." I was like, "Okay." And I have been playing ever since. But I played 3.5 for about a year. And then 5e had come out, and I was graduating the following year, and I wanted to kind of GM my own game and get in at the ground floor because I still didn't quite understand 3.5 after a year of playing.
None of us do.
Yeah, did all the feats. I remember he's like, "Which feat do you want to take?" I'm like, "Do you have a list of them?" And he just drops like the book down in front of me. And of course, by then there was
if
like,
Yeah, if it was a book, you're lucky, and it wasn't like a stack of them. So
yeah,
you
and
next thing you know, you can't see Colin anymore because there's just a stack of books.
yeah, precisely. He's like, "What kind of equipment do you want?" And of course, at this point, there's like ultimate equipment or whatever that book is called, and it's this thick and details
Uh,
every possible thing my Minotaur Ranger could have. And I just asked him, I'm like, "What do you think I should get?" He's like, "You could do this." I'm like, "Okay, I'll take that." And that's pretty much how every decision went in D&D. I'm like, I want to attack this ogre with my best attack. What is that again, Colin? He's like, "You want to do a flying kick?" I'm like, "I do a flying kick."
So, did the game actually take place in a basement?
Uh, un- well, actually, now that you mention it, so our apartments were 3 stories, and the lowest story you actually had to take 5 steps down to.
Uh-huh.
So I think technically we were subterranean. So yes, I actually did start play. Wow, I've never realized that until
Your
now.
expectations were met then.
Yes, precisely. Yeah, and I had a blast. I enjoyed it enough that I wanted to DM, and then when I was walking in downtown Provo, Utah, and I remember seeing a poster for one of the books up, and it had just come out. And I went inside and I asked someone about it, and they're like, "Oh yeah, this just came out. Here's how you play, and you could totally do it." And I bought that book and I just started reading it, and then ran like a Western campaign for my first campaign.
I wonder why basements get such a bad rap.
Basements are awesome.
Like and D&D gets associated and RPGs get associated with basements often. But like if you really think about it, as a kid, like I feel like there was a lot of playrooms that were always put in the basements. So like a lot of other activities would happen in the basement as well.
Yeah, I think basements, they get that, you get that classic moment in the horror movie where they're walking
Yeah.
down the basement stairway and they haven't gotten to the light yet, and they're like, it shows their legs only and the darkness behind them. And I think that just sets a bad tone for basements everywhere. Maybe we need a basement awareness campaign to
I,
like change the perception of basements.
I think so. I mean, you just have a lot of room. And also, I guess for gaming, it's nice because if you have non-gamers in your house, it gamers can be loud at times and it kind of
Yeah,
like
yeah.
creates a buffer.
Right, right. Yeah.
So Nathan wants to know uh
Nate
why
Dogg.
you hate the raw jump rules.
Because no one follows the raw jump rules but Nate. Nate is the only person I've ever had at mine or seen at another table who, when jumping, knew those rules by heart. He
Yeah.
says he had looked them up, but I suspect that Nate actually knows those
You
rules
memorized them, yeah.
because he recited them perfectly when he wanted to jump. And he was also playing a Githyanki, which has, they can cast the jump spell like innately through psionics, and they're complicated. Because I think it mixes the worst things for a new player to know, like the difference between your modifier and your raw strength score,
Yeah.
distances that aren't in 5 foot increments, high jump, which you think in a game with heroes, your high jump would be higher than like 8 feet, though an 8 foot jump is crazy.
Yeah.
Uh, it doesn't seem like that much on a grid because
It
you're,
doesn't do anything for you at all.
so yeah, when and then you have running start and opportunity attacks, and so yeah, so we don't play that. What we do whenever you need to jump something in our game, I we just make an athletics check, and I know whether you're gonna make that, and if they can't make that jump from the beginning, I don't call for the roll. I'm like, you cannot make that jump.
Yeah, I had a character die too from a jump check. Like
Yeah.
I was playing a berserker barbarian and we were on a floor that was sinking towards lava and it was like 10 it was only a 10-foot high jump, right? Like I'm like I'm a half orc, I'm tall and I I know the jump rules. There's like I should be able to do this pretty easily. And the DM's like make a check and I rolled a 1 and as a barbarian, I raged beforehand, and everyone's like, "You gotta re-roll your rage, and you get a advantage on athletics." I was like, "No, I'm the worst kind of barbarian. I'm a berserker, and I've berserked today."
Oh
So I raged
no.
to not have disadvantage.
That's
And I was
awesome.
like, and he slid into the lava to his doom.
Oh my
Uh,
goodness.
so
Lava, yeah, lava's brutal in 5e, and it should be. I mean, lava,
it's lava.
it's lava, yeah.
Uh, have you checked out the path of the beast barbarian?
Oh yeah. No, would you mean like the newest one in Tasha's, where you like the
Yeah,
like, kind of shifter one?
yeah. They
Yeah,
haven't.
super cool.
They have like an insane like super jump power
Oh, really?
where
Yeah,
it's
I
like,
remember reading the Unearthed Arcana. Tasha's I haven't read all the way through since it came out, but it is a really cool subclass.
yeah. I mean, I only know because we just did a video on it the
Oh
other
yeah.
day, and it just went up on the channel yesterday. But the The rule. So here's the rules. When you jump, you can make a strength athletics check and extend your jump by a number of feet equal to the check's total. You can make the special check only once per turn. So it's like whatever your normal jump check is, plus your athletics roll. And like if you really want to tweak out your athletics check, you can. So we're like, you could do like 100-foot jump. You can jump like the Incredible Hulk, but it doesn't say that you're restricted by your movement.
Yeah.
So, and also if you happen to cast jump on that barbarian. So there you go, Nathan. If you really want to break
Yeah,
Justice's game,
Nate's gonna come to my table with that barbarian, and
yeah.
whoever designed that rule should go to the same type of designer jail as the person who wrote the DM has these statistics for these monsters next to all of the druid conjuration spells.
Yeah.
So, but no, that is cool, and I really respect Nate for actually having that rule handy, because a lot of people are like, I want to do X, and I'm like, okay, can you read that for me? And they're like, let me find it. And then like 20 seconds goes by as they get out the book or something. But yeah, Nate also likes to record ammo, and I don't record ammo.
Oh yeah.
He says,
Me
I
neither.
fire my crossbow, and he goes, 1 down, 9 to go. And everybody at the table's like, we're like, we don't do that here.
If that's what's fun for you, Nate, have at it. So BK Dan wants to know, you started with 3.5. Have you played either old school or retro clones?
Oh, interesting. I have wanted to play every free RPG day. I see that classics. I can't remember, adventure classics or something like
Oh,
that.
Dungeon Crawl.
Dungeon Crawl classics.
Yeah.
I've wanted to play that just to get a feel for it. I love the history of D&D, and I love reading about like original D&D stuff. I've actually never played an edition older than third though. I've heard Torchbearer is kind of like that. But no, I would very much like to. I was reading about the what is it? The fireball spell used to have like volume calculations in it. So
Yeah.
technically, if you
There's
cast fireball in Death House in the basement, if we go back to basements, the basement is only a 5 foot tall ceiling, so it literally will engulf everything in the basement with the blowback.
yeah.
Which is pretty cool, but also doing
Ish.
volume
Pretty cool
calculations.
ish.
Ish, yeah.
Yeah. You know, and lightning bolt used to have special rules too. If
Yeah,
it
the
hit a
ricochet.
surface, it would ricochet and bounce. And if you get a chance to play in one of Stefan Pogorni's game, he plays a version of first edition, like his version.
Yeah.
And we totally had that happen where that's one of the either a wizard or they had an item. They cast lightning bolt. It went through all like a bunch of the enemies, hit the wall, came back, went through them again, and then went through half the party and stopped like just before the wizard,
Oh,
killing party members in addition to the monsters.
that's pretty awesome. We ran like a higher tier campaign after Storm King's Thunder where I yoinked some stuff from Against the Giants,
Yeah.
and they were fighting, I think, three frost giants in like an ice cave, and I made it like this blue wall, and things would ricochet, and you could tell our player Rick, who like used to play first edition, his eyes lit up when he saw that his lightning bolt ricocheted because he played this halfling.
Yeah. I knew you were going to say that. I just knew somehow you were going to say
He
that.
loved it. He loved it. And lightning bolt was like his favorite spell. And I didn't
Yeah.
know at the time that was a first edition rule.
Yeah.
But yeah, he immediately could strategize to hit all of the giants. He's like, I've done this before.
Yeah.
So,
He's like, you're in my wheelhouse now. Yeah. Well, that
Right.
was one of the things in the early editions. You'd be like, all right, I shoot my fireball here. I hit the corner this way. You're like doing trigonometry.
And I think that stuff is actually pretty cool because there are sometimes when you're playing 5e in combat, you just get locked into standing in front of a monster. I attack, the monster attacks, I attack. It's like, and that can be fun for a while, but I love the features that encourage like battlefield control or movement, because when you're playing on a grid, I mean, you have that whole room to work with and cover, and it's just, I don't know, it's cool to move around.
Yeah, you just need players that are willing to try and do weird stuff during combat.
Yeah.
And as a GM, you have to be willing to both reward and penalize said actions.
Right. Yeah. The rule of rules and stuff. I think that one of the hardest things to correct out of my players' heads is the reluctance to provoke an opportunity attack. Like,
Yeah.
I let them know, I'm like, remember, you will provoke an opportunity attack. And that almost always in the past would be like, oh, I'm not going to do this anymore. But I'm really happy to see that my players now, they're like, I'll do it. I'll do it. It's only worked out. It did work out negatively our last session because it was from a hell wasp that stung and paralyzed a character when they did it.
Oops. Yeah.
But prior to that, it was all actually a lot of misses because they all have really high AC.
Yeah. What are you guys playing currently?
So we're playing through Descent into Avernus. We have an Armor Artificer, a Oath of the Watchers Paladin, so two newer subclasses, and then a Cavalier Fighter who we always forget about her horse, but is just in the background at all times. And we'll do something. We'll be like, all right, you guys skydived down onto the face of Avernus. And they're like, wait, where's my horse? I'll be like, it's skydove as well.
It becomes the horse from Tangle.
Basically, yeah,
Yeah.
the horse from Tangle, and it's called Bug. And then we have a ranger, I think a monster hunter ranger that's like based off of Dean from Supernatural, and then Rick, who plays like a forge cleric. So they've really started breaking out of the PHB books, which is cool, and also has me going, please read that whole feature for me. I forgot what it does.
Yeah. That there's the 5e is starting finally getting to that point where you don't know exactly what's there because there's so much. And I think they're moving to 5 books, is what I heard. So there's going to be even more.
Interesting. Yeah. I that's one of the main reasons I went to 5e was instead of Pathfinder at the time, was because I think in 2014 there had to have been like 30 Pathfinder books. And I saw that shelf and I was like, I don't think I can do all that right now, but I can read one book. And now I feel for people who are entering the hobby right now because they're seeing what I didn't want to see back then. And it's really daunting to read one book when people on the internet are talking about something 3 books later.
Yeah. 30 even sounds light.
30 sounds right. Yeah, I guess if you count adventures and stuff.
And then and all the third party stuff. But that's what happens when something's been around. But if you think about it, 5e, they've really reined that in comparison to previous editions. I mean, 7 years, really not that many books by comparison.
Right. And they have, I really liked their, I get that they're, wanting to be profitable and stuff. I actually liked their earlier release schedule where it really capped off at 2 or 3 books a year.
Yeah.
Because that was very digestible. Now, I know that I think Chris Perkins has said that they won't exceed 3 books a year from Wizards of the Coast. Though I know some books are like done in third party, like the Acquisitions Incorporated book was kind of more owned by Penny Arcade, and then the Wildmount book was, with Critical Role. So I don't think those counted towards that 3 that they have. But to everybody who sees a Wizards book is out, if it's got D&D on the cover, I feel like I have to read it. So
yeah, it really, we're not really going to differentiate between the Critical Role book and the other books.
Right. Yeah, I'm going to read it just the same, and it's a great book.
So yeah, I was thinking they would do like an anthology adventure, a big campaign book, a players thing, a monster thing like Volos or Mordekainen's, and then like maybe like a Magic the Gathering. But after you say that, I'm like, oh, maybe not. Maybe one of those will be swapped out for a third party thing.
Gosh, and I would love for them to do another Volos style book because that is still my I think that is still my favorite 5e book, even
Yeah.
after all the ones we've gotten. It's just
I kind of feel like the Ravenloft book, the Van Richten's Guide, is gonna like I feel like that fills the same role as Volos and
mm,
Mordenkainen because like they they both just have like different stuff in the front that like put in there, and I like the way they also figure out how to mash in some player options as well, and it's just not a 100% GM book.
yeah. And I do like that they do that. I think it keeps every book fresh. There's something for everybody. At the same time, though, when referencing them later, it makes it hard to remember where stuff is. Like if you're like, where was that player option from? The
Yeah,
the alternate tiefling was that
which one?
Sword Coast? No, it's Mordenkainen because that one has the devils and demons. Um, and I love Mordenkainen. And the Mordenkainen's was a great book. Oh, some of the sections on lore are very long though, with no pictures, and that one was hard for me to read for a little bit.
Yeah. The D&D Beyond makes it a lot easier though. Like I
Yes,
can't even imagine playing without it at this point.
right. Yeah. I had when I have to go and make a paper character sheet for another system, I'm like, oh my gosh,
Barbarians, you savages.
right. I'm like, this is so difficult. Now, with D&D Beyond, I played a warlock and I collect all the source material and I'm looking at the invocations. I'm like, this looks like more than I remember. And it had consolidated, of course, all the ones from all the books.
Yeah.
But yeah, I can't remember. I can't realize how hard it would be having like 7 books strewn across my table with all the warlock sections open.
And that is how exactly how we used to do it.
Yeah.
So, I can't remember life before hover cards.
Right, right.
The tooltips. So what kind of stuff do you like to work on as a designer?
People ask me that sometimes. I like it all, honestly. I think that variant rules are kind of fun. I I like more kind of I mean, adventures are always fun. Anything that a GM can use to kind of make their game more interesting or more nuanced or easier are kind of my favorites. By this point, I've done a little of everything. I've made some custom races. I've made creature stat blocks, written adventures. But I find myself really enjoying kind of like alternative rules. We did Elminster's Candlekeep Companion, and in that we have like an expanded downtime option for research that's like super research in Candlekeep because you have
Yeah.
access to all the books. And then we have rules for like training. You can buy a training manual at Candlekeep, and as long as you have this training manual, you get like a new proficiency, but you have to read that manual every 6 days. Um,
Yeah, we just did a video. We just shot a video yesterday talking about these. So
so
I do
cool.
like the special edition cover.
It's so good.
It looks yeah.
Yeah, and I spent so much time studying Candlekeep for that DM's Guild supplement that
Yeah.
I love Candlekeep now. I liked Candlekeep before, but I wasn't really sure how to use it in my games because it was so daunting, the idea of this place with all this knowledge. And but now, after writing co-leading a book with like 100 pages on the library fortress, I feel like I know it pretty well. And
Yeah.
so now, I mean, of course, next week I'm already calling my local game store asking about that variant cover. And he's like, I think I'm going to get 10 in. I'm like, you need to save one, please.
Yeah. I I really enjoyed the section on Candlekeep itself, even
Mm,
more so than the adventures. I just felt like it's a great backdrop for like if you want to have a headquarters or a base of operations
yeah.
for your players. I feel like it has a lot of utility, and then it also has the nice added benefit of you have all these adventures you can tie directly to it, so you
Yeah.
could run a whole campaign out of that book. It kind of made me think of like a Scooby Doo kind of campaign where you're just
Yeah.
going off and solving all these mysteries, Some of them are actually at Candlekeep. Some of them are elsewhere.
Yeah.
But Candlekeep itself is interesting in the sense that it's like a town and would
Mhm.
say this serve the same purposes as a town. You basically would never even need to leave.
Yeah, I'm curious about that section. I think Chris Lindsay wrote it.
Yeah.
We on our book we worked with Ed Greenwood to write that, and consolidating all that lore took a long time, but was really interesting. Just the nuance of that location, and I've used it in my own games for as the place that our lore bard went to get his ninth level spell. Because when everybody got to level 17, there were a bunch of characters who had who now had access to ninth level spells, and I asked them to kind of help me tell that story. How would you learn this magic? What does that look like? Because these are the most powerful spells someone can cast. And the bard wanted to go to Candlekeep, and that section in our campaign was maybe a 10-15 minute section of our session, because I didn't know much about Candlekeep, and there really wasn't anything out there on it at the time. But now, if they were to go back, we have so much more on it, that it feels like a real place. And yeah, there's like a dragon underneath the fortress that's a ghost dragon, and there's all these different towers and the hearth. And yeah, I think they added a store into it now. There's like a place you can buy things inside the keep.
Yeah, there's definitely a blacksmith
Yeah.
in there. But yeah, I mean there is so much. And then like the I like the fact that each of the mysteries are tied to a book. And one of the things
Yeah.
we kind of talk about a little bit is how the books themselves you can introduce as items into your game. Because most of them are tied to like specific types of lore or information. And like in our own games, when we have something like that, a lot of times we'll allow a player to roll with advantage if they have time to reference something like that.
Yeah.
So if it comes like a piece of treasure as well, even if you didn't want to use the adventure, I feel like you could still use the books themselves as to implement into your game. For
Yeah.
us, we homebrew most things, and we very very rarely use um, published content and adventures. So we buy them all and usually just like pick out pieces to use.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm excited to see. Yeah, I have a few friends on that book. Jen Kretschmer. I'm excited to read her adventure. Amy Vorpal's the Candlekeep construction one sounds
Yeah.
pretty cool. And then Daniel Kwan's is really interesting to me from an interview that I saw yesterday. And I think it's cool that Wizards has hired him to write, and let him tell the story he wants to tell with that. And from what I've read of it, it seems awesome. I love the idea of making key something that is more universal, as opposed to just being like a magic monk thing.
Yeah.
So I'm ready to read that book.
Yeah, there's a bunch of great things in there. So BK Dan thinks you look like Will Wheaton.
Oh, okay. I'll take it. I'll take it. That's not
He said he
bad.
had to do a double take.
I don't come to think of it. I don't think I know what Will Wheaton looks like. I just know his voice.
Yeah, I can see maybe. I see like a younger Will Wheaton for sure.
Hmm.
It's definitely not a terrible comparison.
Yeah, I'll take it. I'll take it. Yeah.
So during the pandemic, have you found that you're gaming more or less or the same?
If I'm gaming more or less or the same, I'd say I'm gaming more. One, the online gaming that's taken place is has like surged. Two, I've kind of it's strange to me the idea that all of these creators that I'm meeting and working with, I've never really met in person for the most part. I've like said hi to people a few times back at GameholeCon 2019,
Yeah,
but I feel like a lot of the work that I've done to kind of get my foot in the industry has been during this period, which I'm grateful. I feel like I'm still progressing, despite everything. But it's also kind of bittersweet because I'd probably be seeing these people in person, sitting down with them for coffee at a convention. And it's going to be strange to see these people in person one of these days. But The benefit of that is that we don't have to wait for conventions to get in a game, to do a charity event, to run a bonus encounter for Take This Game Day. I feel like I play a lot more than I did before, and I get to play, which is nice because I'm usually GMing.
Yeah. So we started a game right after the pandemic started. We're like, we'll all have a lot more time to do things, and we might as well occupy it with something, right? And then and that game's like, it's James Intricasa v um, Goblin Katie Eugenio from DM Jazzy Hands, and it's so. But what ended up happening was, like, we're like, well, I guess with us being locked down, we're gonna have more time on our hands. But what ended up happening was, now, like, every con has gone virtual, so like there's like way more con fatigue, because before, where it's like you're limited by having to travel and go to cons,
Right.
now it's like people are taking part in all of these online conventions and virtual conventions, and it actually ended up having the opposite effect that we anticipated.
Yeah, that's an interesting thought. The idea that we're fatigued from them, and I think it's also because they feel very similar in some respects. If everybody kind of attends the same one, it's not, oh, is this person at this convention this time? And they're like, oh, I don't know. Maybe they'll be here tomorrow.
Yeah.
But everything's a click away. So that's interesting.
it,
Yeah.
it does it does make it easier.
Yeah.
um what is there a specific con, like, if you could pick the first con you go back to, what would it be?
A Game Whole Con, I think.
Yeah.
My first big gaming convention was Gen Con 50. And I hadn't been to like a gaming convention before then. So I was sitting with some of the guys from my D&D group, and I was like, do y'all want to go on a guys trip? Because Sam, I think, my wife, had started school at the time, and we reserved one day on that Saturday for Gen Con 50. And I said I'd drive. So they all took off Friday. I drove 15 hours. We
Yeah.
checked into a hotel at like 11 p.m., 30 minutes away from Gen Con at this Baymont hotel or something. And the next morning we got there super early. And I remember getting into the exhibit hall and being so overwhelmed
It's
by
just a
this.
sea of vendors and people.
Oh my gosh, yeah, like, and seeing the people who make some of my favorite things and not realizing how accessible they were and how willing they were to talk about their games, and just sharing in that excitement with them of like, oh my gosh, you made this. I have played this game 30 times. I love it. And there was a point about halfway through that exhibit hall where I sat near the bathroom because I was just so overwhelmed by everything. I needed to take a break. And then the next day we drove back. So I must have driven like 35 hours in the span of 3 days.
Yeah.
And
And
the
20
con was
20 of it was
insane.
just in Texas, probably.
Right. Yeah. Basically. Yeah. That's actually not that wrong, honestly. I'd anticipate it's at least 13 hours.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, so when I went to Gamehole Con in 2019, I really liked the intimacy of the convention. I liked that the exhibit hall I could walk in one day, that there was a lot of games going on, and I could see people gaming outside the hall instead of it being kind of spread out. Though I really do love Gen Con. I just like that it was more tabletop role playing focused.
Yeah, I think 2019 was my first year of really, maybe it was 2018. I don't know. Maybe it was the year before. But I know I went to Origins and then Gen Con, and my son went with me. Um, and we drove to Ohio, stayed there a night, picked up Doug, and then from there drove to Gen Con. And
Mhm.
it was a decent amount of driving. It was probably like 13. I think it's like a 13-hour drive for us.
Yeah, that's a lot.
Um, and yeah, and it was definitely a cool experience.
Mhm.
Uh, 2019 was the first time that I went to Gamehole Con,
Mhm.
and that Gary kind of still on my list
Hmm.
to get to, but it was the con where I felt like I did the most con stuff at in
At Gary Con?
comparison. Yeah, at Gamehole Con.
Or, yeah.
Yeah, you know,
That's interesting too, because I was at that convention. I was probably stationed at a booth most of the time. We probably met and talked. And
there's a good possibility because the vending area is small. Like there's not a
right.
lot. I had gone with Arcania Workshop, and they were set up kind of just across from Nord Games, which we had a relationship with them for a while, and I'm friends with
Yeah.
those guys. Um, so I spent quite a bit of time in the vending hall. Actually, so in Arcania Workshop and Newer Games were right near the David Pancake booth.
Okay.
So
Oh yeah, with the dragons,
dragons,
right?
yeah, that's why I
Yeah.
mentioned like because like if you've
They were
seen
to
his
the
stuff,
right of us at the end of
yeah,
that hall. We were just kind of right on the right when you enter.
yeah.
It's
So
interesting. Yeah.
and
David
then
Pancake
and
stuff
actually
is
I got
so
to
cool.
play in a game with Matthew.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Which one was that?
the role play roulette.
Roleplay
Stephen
roulette.
was
Oh,
DMing.
interesting. Was that where you jump in for like an hour with was that with Satine?
Yeah, so it was it was that you just get a random character from D&D Beyond,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and that's what you were playing.
Yeah, that
So
was actually the first convention that I met Matt, and I had already met Bill at that
yeah,
one. But it was so funny because I remember sitting at a restaurant. We went to get like some, I think it's poutine. Is that what it's called? The cheesy, something like that. And I remember watching Matt. He was late for the Alien game,
uh,
and he had a glass of whiskey in one hand and this big ass burger in the other. And I feel like he channeled his inner Shaggy, like in that moment. Like I never talk about like his Scooby Doo stuff or anything like that with him. It's always about tabletop. And I watched him fit this entire burger in his mouth, left like a crescent moon, and then dipped that entire thing of whiskey and then
yeah.
ran out the door for that cab. And I feel like I gained so much respect for him in that span of 5 seconds. Um,
That's funny. Yeah, it's kind of weird. It's kind of weird to like see when I see him in a movie now, and it's
mhm.
like, huh, I was in a game with him. So
Yeah, it is strange.
and well, also even in the industry itself, when like we would talk about the books, the games, and stuff, and then it really changes it once you actually start meeting the people that make the stuff,
Mhm.
and it makes it harder to like critique stuff.
Yeah, it does. And I think 2020 has been bad for that because I think the anonymity. I don't know because I wasn't really in the online side of the industry before 2018. Really, I kind of observed passively from afar. I hadn't really been writing or anything. But yeah, there are times where Twitter will get into this kind of more negative spin, and I wonder at times, like, did did this person who messaged me, am I going to run into them at a convention next
Yeah.
year, and are they going to hate my guts, or are we going to see each other, smile, laugh, and then that interaction just passes on? Like it's probably the latter. Like I don't think anybody's going to be holding major grudges. But when that's the only interactions you have with some of these creators and just people who love tabletop, and just it's very interesting to have never interacted with them in person in some respects.
Yeah, the aha moment for us is like for me was like we would do a lot of reviews of Unearthed Arcana, and you'd just be like, "What was this designer thinking? Are they out of their mind?" And then you start meeting people and be like, "Oh, I guess I was kind of a dick."
Yeah.
Um,
You play a game with Dan and you're like, oh, Dan is so nice. I
yeah.
feel bad for stepping on this variant rule.
Oh, forget about that. You play a game with Dan and you meet him, you're like, "My God, he's a bear of a man. He's
Is
a
he really
giant."
tall?
Dan Dillon, yeah.
Oh my goodness. That is super interesting.
He's
I
like
know.
he's a bear. He's a werebear. I think he's a werebear. He's given a bear given human form.
Wow. That is very interesting. I know Todd Kenrick is really tall too. I met
Yeah.
him at
Everyone
Gamable
seems so
Con.
really tall in the space when I meet them now. I'm also really short, so it doesn't help.
Yeah, I'm 5'8", so yeah, I feel you on that.
Yeah,
Everybody
same
seems
height.
really
So
tall. Yeah, Todd
here,
is really
everybody's
tall.
like this big, so it's like,
Yeah, but I mean, but hey, dwarves, like the dwarves, we might be a little shorter, but we get better strength scores, the
not
Constitution.
anymore.
Oh, well, this is true. Well, we still get the battle axe. You still get the battle axe. Dwarven weapon training. You can still be the wizard that has the
No,
proficiency
no,
with the
I think
battle
they're
axe.
getting rid of that too. Right? All the cultural stuff is kind of getting stripped out.
At least the beards. We still
We
get the
get the
beards.
beards.
And that's all that matters.
Maybe we'll see if we get to keep the beards or not. Dwarven women beards, yay or nay?
My wife's 20th level cleric, Big Bertha, has a
Yeah,
beard, and we
awesome.
commissioned a portrait of her. And yeah, she sits above our D&D table as our patron saint, and that beard is beautiful and has the kind of Nordic clasp on the beard.
For me, like in our world, we definitely do bearded. Obviously, if a character wanted to not have a beard, they could, but
Yeah,
the default is bearded. It's one of the few things that culturally makes dwarves really different than like other races and real world races.
yeah. Yeah, it's always player choice. If you want a beard, yeah, go for it. If you want to be a beardless male dwarf, yeah, go for it. Um, I would recommend some sideburns or something,
Yeah.
but still, I know there's some cool beardless dwarves out there.
What is your favorite player race?
You know, I used to say that I was, because we all like to play that game where it's like, what class would you be? What's your in real life strength score? Are you a dwarf or a lizard folk? And I used to think I was a dwarf, but I don't drink, and I mean, I have a beard. I think when it hit me, I was reading through the different races in the PHB just to go through them again. I was actually reading Mordenkainen's later, and I was reading about gnomes. And I was like, shit, I think I'm a gnome.
Yeah.
I relate to gnomes so much. So I will say gnomes. And gnomes are not out there a lot, even though they're one of those PHB races. I don't see them a lot in adventures, and they're kind of,
Gnomes have
yeah,
always have been really tough because anytime you have to start the description off with, well, it's kind of like a dwarf, but
yeah, yeah.
I mean, and that was the earlier edition of the game, like, and you know, they've gotten better about giving them their own identity
Hmm.
and you know, making it their own thing, but it took a while.
I like gnomes because there's that inner curiosity that I think bodes well for my decisions that I like to make as a player. Like I have two main characters. One is like a half Sahwagin Triton, so it's just so I can make him really ugly looking.
Yeah.
He's supposed to be a scary conquest paladin. Kind of looks like the monster from Muck Lagoon. And then my other main character is Melvin Manyroads, who's a gnome wizard, but his whole thing is like he lived a really sheltered life for like decades, and when he finally gets out, he wants to map the world. So he studies conjuration to be able to teleport and all this stuff. But it also means that if I want to make a decision at the table where my curiosity is so much that I need to touch the trap to figure out what happens, Melvin shares that desire. And so
Yeah.
nobody can blame Melvin because that's his MO. He has to explore every road. So when everybody's, like, I don't know if we should do this, Melvin is like, yes, well, we actually should tamper with that jewel because we need to know if the jewel will lead to the consequence we expect. And yeah, and then Mage Hand all the way.
Do you have a penchant for pranks?
He's not super pranky,
Uh,
but he will do a few of them. He's just kind of, yeah, he'll try everything once sort of person. So in that way, he's kind of impressionable. He's ended up in a couple cults throughout his adventures that he doesn't quite understand, and then thinks that ditching them is easier than it actually is.
that
And
is great. Not a cult, a couple cults.
he's dabbled. He's definitely dabbled at some cults. He may or may not have joined the Zentarim for a brief stint and could owe them some money. But being that he's a conjuration wizard and relatively high level, he can teleport and just kind of bail for a little while.
That's great.
It'll catch up to him one day though.
What kind of stories do you like to tell as a GM when you're running games?
I was talking about this with one of my players last night, who was asking me about how do I feel most D&D groups play. And it's very interesting because I think with the entrance of streamed games, from what I understand when talking to players who started in older editions of D&D, is you learn to play from playing with other GMs. You got to see their style, you played in their campaigns, and that's how that and their stories is how you learn. Now D&D has like an entertainment wing too, where you can see people playing really entertaining, awesome characters, telling these incredible stories, and their characters have such depth. I think that our games set kind of in the middle, maybe leaning on stories, because we very much love the classic elements of this big temple statue that has its own history, has a little bit of lore to it, is going to do something to you if you try to touch the fancy jewel, but you don't know what, and you want to try to play it. But at the same time, following up with my characters and my players and their characters weekly, saying, what kind of story do you want to tell for this player? I noticed you did this. How does your character feel about this thing, and where are they going to be 2 weeks from now? Because we like those moments of drama and those reveals and having dynamic characters, but we also like combat and exploration and flinging fireballs inside basements.
As you do.
Yes.
So I've kind of been running an informal poll on here when I
Okay.
have guests on. How often do dungeons appear in your games?
Ooh, how often do dungeons appear in my games? Well, currently currently I'm running an official campaign, so it's as
Yeah.
often as dungeons appear in that. But when I was running homebrew, it was a tier 3 and 4 campaign, and I would say in higher levels, we almost structured the big moments of the campaign around dungeons, because it's hard to challenge higher level characters without running them through a few encounters, unless you're making like every encounter life and death. So I think in that span of about 8 or 9 levels, there were 1, 2, 3, 4, I think 5 or 6 dungeons. I would say you need a dungeon however big it's going to be, every 2 levels, I would say.
Okay. Because so our games tend to be kind of like combat light, where
Okay.
we end up with one big fight per session, essentially. Occasionally, we'll do 2, maybe 3, but that's a little bit more rare. So
Yeah.
we, with that, like that means you don't really have room for dungeons,
Yeah.
and nearly as much. So I've kind of, so what I'm trying to figure out is if in general there are far less dungeons and Dungeons and Dragons nowadays than there used
Mhm.
to be, or is it just how we're playing the game currently?
I think it's a mix of both. I think that 5e D&D, like looking at it from a design perspective, sits in a weird space of dungeons can get deadly really fast, because the ideal encounters per day is 3 to 5, like medium to hard encounters or something like that. And dungeons like the Dungeon of the Dead 3 in Descent into Avernus can end up really deadly if characters make certain decisions. However, in campaigns like Tomb of Annihilation, where it's a hex crawl and you have 1 encounter per day, the characters aren't super challenged by that, because their abilities, they'll use their best abilities first, knowing that maybe there's not another encounter that day. But I do think there are less of them overall. And I think that dungeons require a good deal of work from GMs to make and figure out the story and the rooms and everything like that. So I'd say there are less.
They also they also kind of detract from storytelling as well in a way.
Yeah.
Like not necessarily in a it's not necessarily bad. It's just the sense once you enter the dungeon, right? You know, you get the you can reveal little pieces of the story that the players kind of can interact with, but it's a lot less fluid, I guess, in how it gets presented and the outcomes.
Yeah. And I think it really depends on like what counts as a dungeon. Does a warehouse with 3 levels count as a dungeon? I
I
would
would say
say
yes.
I'd say
Yeah.
yes. Yeah. So that includes in my dungeon, my once every 2 levels, I'd count like the first warehouse in Waterdeep Dragon Heist as a mini dungeon for first level players, but it's not as extensive as like you're resting in hallways and moving through
Yeah.
corridors and stuff. I think that the definition of a dungeon is changing. And yeah, if it has more than 3 rooms, I'd probably say it could be counted as a dungeon ish.
I feel like the dungeons we use nowadays in our games are like 3 to 5 rooms.
Yeah, and I think most play type is moving away from it, and encounters take a long time. So the idea of being in a dungeon for a month is kind of exhausting. My first GM, he had a mega dungeon, which was like 30 levels, and he had used it throughout a bunch of different campaigns. But that area, I think we were in that area for like 2 months of game time. And the idea that only like 16 hours had passed felt like we were not progressing at all.
Yeah.
And yeah, you want to progress in games. You want to get the next big item or the next big ability. And to be stuck in a dungeon for literally months of game time is exhausting.
And a little bizarre too, right? Uh,
Yeah, yeah.
to think
Yeah,
about
it's
it.
weird to come back and be like, meanwhile, remember the last 2 sessions? 10 minutes has gone by.
Yeah. I mean, like with your adventures, would it be like coming back from a war? Would they have to readjust to society or being released from prison?
Right, yeah. No,
Uh,
yeah, bit of recidivism and stuff like that. Yeah.
yeah.
It's an interesting thought too, just the idea of dungeons in general. I think it really depends on the campaign type you run. Like, I don't think dungeons are great for, intrigue. They might be good for mystery, depending on the mystery. Hack and slash, yeah, obviously, but it's interesting where dungeons kind of don't fit.
Yeah. And it could be interesting to see like how could you make them fit in those places where they don't fit, right?
Hmm.
Like those I always enjoy trying to play with those spaces and
Yeah,
see like how far you can push the boundaries of
yeah,
the game. So
for sure.
Doug asked the question, what do you think the ideal session length is?
Like time,
Yeah.
I like 3 to 4 hours. I like 3 hours with a flex. To say that a game that you stay for 4 hours, but the game could be about three would be cool. Because then you get a little bit of time to talk, to chat, to set up for the
Right.
game, to wind down, and then you have a little bit of flex time for if you are right on the cusp of that awesome moment. You are not asking really fatigued players to stay another hour when they've already been there 4 hours. Um, that's how we'll often do it. Is we play from about 7 to 10:30, and if about at 10:15 I can tell that a really rewarding moment is going to come up that I can get in this session, I'll say, "Hey, are you all okay with staying till 11 today?" And they'll be like, "Yeah, of course." But I don't want to do that at 11. Say, "Are you all okay staying till 11:30?" Because
Yeah.
that's a little bit more of an ask. So I'd say 3 to 4 hours is my preference. But I share this thought with Mike Shea that if you can end session early and it'll be at a heightened moment, end it early. Like if you play 2 hours and 45 minutes and you're at a perfect cliffhanger, cut the session.
Yeah, I agree. Like I do that for two reasons. One is I probably haven't planned out what's next. I just throw out a cliffhanger,
Yeah, yeah,
so it gives me a week or a month or however long the time is to think about what the what it's actually going to mean.
for sure.
We tend to be very prep light,
Okay.
so usually like 3 sentences, maybe a encounter, and like we see where it goes from there. Um,
Yeah, I think that Nate has definitely seen us play until past midnight. We
yeah.
have done that before. Yeah. Um,
Back in
I'm definitely prep heavy. I like to prep. Improv frightens me a little bit, but the
yeah.
sessions that I have improv, my players haven't noticed and they still enjoy it. So maybe I need to loosen up a little bit.
Well, I mean, I guess like when we found Sly Flourish, he kind of was speaking to how me and Ted were already kind of running, and that just came out of a combination of necessity and just being worn down by groups and players just never doing what you anticipate they'll do. So
Mm-hmm.
you're just like I'll write 3-4 pages of material and be like, get through a paragraph, or they do something where none of it's useful for that session. So after a while, you just throw my hands up in the air and say, "Why am I even bothering?" I'll just show up, or it's like, "Oh, you just had a busy week, and you don't want to be the one to cancel games." So we'll go like, "All right, let's see how this goes." Um, so
Yeah, yeah, I feel that last one a lot.
yeah, so I feel like that it's kind of like morphed from that.
Mm-hmm.
When we used to play like 20 years ago, I was in my early 20s, and people would show up between 3, 4 in the afternoon on a Saturday, and there were so many days people were leaving and the light sun was coming up. Uh, Not so much anymore as I get older. Now it's
Yeah.
like online games, like 2 hours is a good amount of time to play the game. In person, or they tend to be a little bit longer, but like I feel like 2 hours of it is not the game; it's just hanging
Mm-hmm.
out, at least. So
I think it depends on like how much everybody and how friendly the group is. Like how like if you're really good friends outside the game, it's not a big ask to stay for like 5 hours, especially if you're like joking during the game or you take longer breaks and you just chill out. Um, if you're running an online game or you have like a guest or somebody who's not used to it, then it's a lot more noticeable. There's a lot more fatigue with that sort of stuff. But yeah, I definitely remember whenever I started playing, we would have 6 hour sessions in some instances. And looking back on them now, I don't remember regretting being there. I really liked hanging out with all of those people, and those were the people I was going to hang out with for 6 hours anyway. So might as
yeah.
well be gaming during it.
Well, I mean, we've been doing this for a while, so we've gotten a lot of comments and emails and messages at this point. And the some of the times the questions you get are just so bizarre. It's like it just makes me wonder who you are playing the game with, right? To me,
Mm-hmm.
especially because the way we had to learn the game back in the earlier parts of it, and you didn't have resources that have now, like online. Like the idea of playing with people that weren't your friends is kind of really bizarre, and it seems like there's lots of people that do that now, and I just
Mm-hmm.
feel like you're gonna have a better experience if you play with friends, and if they're not your friends, like that should be part of the experience, is like not making but
Becoming
becoming
friends.
friends with them,
Yeah.
through the shared experience.
Yeah. We started with the group that we have now. We've been playing about 4 years. It started with a little drawing that I did that was like, want to play D&D? Like this Friday, we'll meet here. And we would just sit at this gaming store that sold coffee, and we would drink coffee and work on schoolwork. And my wife, she would prepare for class because she's a teacher. And I would sit there with that little a little like tea stand thing sitting on the edge of the table. And I posted like a wanted poster for a giant slayer with the details of the game. And I got a bunch of messages. And I say a bunch, but like 8.
Yeah.
And two of them were players that one of them stayed through that entire campaign, and then the other one stayed through that and the campaign that followed, and still stays at our table today. And then we met a lot of people through that game store that now, um, of course, they're like our best friends. We watch movies with them. We'll grill out, that sort of thing. Um, Not as frequently as we used to, of course, but
Right.
fingers crossed for the future that barbecues can become a thing, and we can go out to stores one day without uh, wearing masks and having to worry about all that.
Yeah, one day. I think we're getting closer. We're getting
One
closer.
day, yeah, we'll get
So
there. We'll get there.
we are up on the hour. It's been great chatting with you.
Oh
Final
wow.
thoughts before we head out?
Final thoughts. Just thanks for having me. This is fun. I love chatting and talk about games. This is what I like about conventions: is sitting and chatting about our games and telling stories from them. So yeah, if people want, they can follow me on Twitter at Justice Arman, and I have a website, www.justicearman.com, which has some blog articles on it that people can read if they want to.
And as always, you can find those links down in the description. So until next time, stay nerdy.
Yeah.